Gators Breakdown episode 128 is ready to go. The last look before National Signing Day. I'm your host, David Waters. You can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. And joining me tonight, both co-hosts Bill Sykes and Will Miles. You can find Bill on Twitter at RealBSykes. And Will Miles, the founder of ReadandReaction.com, our partnership site for Gators Breakdown. You can find Will on Twitter at WillMilesSEC. And Will, you survived the post-Super Bowl chaos up there in the city of Philadelphia.
Hey, thus far, man, the parade's on Thursday, and I can only imagine how many fires are going to be set and poles are going to be climbed and all sorts of crazy stuff. There were some interesting goings on last night in the city of brotherly love, that's for sure. But we only heard a few gunshots out where I'm at. There were a lot of fireworks, and certainly a lot of people out sort of celebrating between 10 and midnight. But I don't know. I had some friends who drove down to Philly last night after the game, and they had a fantastic time. So everybody pretty much behaved themselves for the most part. There's some videos out there of various things that I suppose Philadelphia won't be too proud of. But hey, you only win once, so that first time once. So enjoy it while you can.
I do remember the video you sent me of you trust falling from an awning and trying to let people catch you.
I'm too fat for that, man. There's no way I do that. I'll leave that up to the skinny people who are a lot younger than I am.
Oh man, Bill, what's going on, man?
Man, this is like Christmas Eve for me, man. Are you kidding? I love this stuff. And I was thinking, maybe that was the problem the last few years. We didn't leave Greg Dortch's cookies out the night before signing day. But no, man, this is what it's all about for me. I love, especially a good signing day, a better one than we've had recently, and looking very optimistically in the next 48 hours. And just the idea of what we see on paper, we're like, wow, there's a talent injection coming to the roster at University of Florida, and I'm just ready to see what Mullen can do with some new firepower.
Yeah, and going back to last week, Bill, people really did pick up on when you were talking about, hey, look, there's going to be this article and this tweet and that tweet talking about, hey, this guy can look here, this guy's going to look there, this guy looks good for Florida, this guy doesn't look so good for Florida. And you know what? It was like clockwork. You saw it every day. Yep. Probably from about Thursday, Friday. You really ramped up over the weekend because of the visits, and on Sunday as well because visits are wrapping up. And there were a lot of articles out there generating wonder for some of these recruits now.
Yeah, listen, man, I'm a guy, like I said last week, I've been following recruiting for decades at the University of Florida, and I've been through the Willie Williams recruitment with his lobster, and the saga when Keith Rivers was with Zook at the basketball game, and we were talking about how he was wearing a Gator jacket, and I've been through the Dalvin Cook thing, and in the good times too, the Tebows and Dante Fowler flipping on Florida State. And so I've been through the highs and the lows. And like I said, the one thing that's constant is you reach this moment, and it's usually right about this week where as they press for commits, the good news starts filtering through the program and people start capitalizing on that and trying to generate hype for articles or whatever. And it's this combination of factors that you start thinking like, oh man, this is it. This is the big one. We're going to get the class of classes. And it almost never works out perfectly. It just doesn't, for anybody. And, but this is looking good. That said, yes, right now I'm hearing my inbox is blowing up with good news about every single prospect. And as much as I appreciate it, and I know people are getting really great information, and we're all kind of networking and sharing what we got and trying to patch this together to give you guys an accurate picture. Some of this info that's coming from very solid sources, and in a lot of cases coming directly from the mouth of the kids that are community coaches, sometimes it just doesn't work out all the way. So we're probably not going to end up with quite as good as we think right now. But regardless, the floor of what we're probably going to see on National Signing Day is still a vast improvement over where things have been under the past regime, and it's going to be a class that brings a lot of good news and a lot of excitement.
Absolutely, and we'll definitely take a look at all of that. But remember, before we do, you can find all your Gators Breakdown episodes on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, and YouTube. Search on those sites to get the links by following Gators Breakdown on Twitter and on Facebook at Gators Breakdown. And you're on iTunes and Google Play, please rate and review the show. Let Gator Nation know what they're getting with Gators breakdown. And as we mentioned, of course, National Signing Day is Wednesday. We couldn't go without doing a show, partly because Florida had their last visit weekend. A lot of things came out of that. Crystal balls flowing in left and right for on the 24/7 network about where some of these prospects will be going. But Bill, you broke it down pretty good last week, but I think we have to do it again, and because we get the question a lot about how many can Florida bring in, how many are they looking at. You came up with 24 counters, the 2 transfers, Van Jefferson, Trayvon Grimes, 13 early signees, so 9 spots left. But, there's still some wiggle room with that as well. We'll see what the NCAA does with Randy Russell's spot. Florida could get one back if they learn between now and Wednesday if they can fit him in or not. Does Florida even worry about the numbers? That's a question I've been asked, and some people said there's some thought out there that they could not, that they could just go with the flow and maybe see what happens there. But the numbers crunching, not only just for the amount of spots that might be left, but the number of prospects that are left. Florida may find themselves crunching some numbers.
Yeah, they might. And just a really super brief recap, because a lot of people are still asking, you can sign 25 each year. Those are what's called initial counters. Regardless of your scholarship limit, like how many guys you got on roster, you're allowed to take 25 now. And Florida only has 24 this year. The reason why is they took 3 transfers prior, and they counted 2 of those back to the 2017 class, but one of them they could not. And so that took away from one of their 25. So that left them with 24. Then they took the 2 wide receiver transfers, like you said, Trayvon Grimes and Van Jefferson. So that leaves them with 22. Then they took 13 early signees. So that leaves us with 9 spots left. They've currently got 3 commitments in offensive lineman Richard Garage, offensive lineman Griffin McDowell, and wide receiver Justin Watkins. And so that leaves 6 spots left, unless, like you said, Randy Russell's spot is approved by the NCAA to go back into the pot and take another one. I don't know if they've already talked to the NCAA. I mean, they'll get it back at some point, but they may have to be something they get for next year and count back because they had a spot open. It's all kind of funny with that. But I would look for about 6 spots. The only other way they open up another 1 or 2 is if things get a little squirrely and somebody decides to enroll later. We won't go into that too much, but there's other possibilities there. But I would look for about 6. And with the board sitting at anywhere from 12 to 14 guys left on the board, not everybody's going to have a spot unless, like I said to start the show, this doesn't go the way we think. And that's a possibility too. I mean, they may not fill out every spot this year, and Gator fans need to prepare for that.
Yeah, I think if you look at what they've currently got on the board right now at the 16 guys, you've got 1 quarterback, 2 tight ends, 2 running backs, a wide receiver, and 4 offensive linemen if you count Garage and McDowell. Then you got 4 safeties, but they have 0 corners, 1 linebacker, and 0 defensive linemen. So really on the defensive side of the ball, I think that's where I'm going to be focusing in terms of where they close, is those guys coming in. And you can see that in terms of who's available. I mean, if you look at the guys on the board, there are a lot of defensive linemen, outside linebackers who are listed on that board, and there's a reason for that, right? And so some of those guys are going to be coming, and they're going to fill in those spots. But certainly that's also where a lot of the talent lies as well. And so it'll be interesting to see how they close and who they bring in. And it's a good problem if you're able to say to somebody, hey, we need you to gray shirt, or if you're able to say there's not a spot for you. I don't know whether they'll necessarily do that this year. I'm not sure that history indicates that in transition classes you typically get to do that. But this is also a new year, in that you've got the early signing period and you sort of have those guaranteed spots, and you've really been able to zone in on these guys rather than having to keep that first part of the class together. And who knows, maybe it's a new time for this sort of stuff.
And talking about zoning in on a guy, we'll kind of quickly just look at this past weekend. The top prospect out of this past weekend was, of course, wide receiver Jacob Copeland, who was previously committed to head coach Jim McElwain. McElwain gets fired, let go, of course, and then Dan Mullen got to kind of recruit Jacob Copeland for Florida, and it looks like he's done a pretty good job. We've seen all the pictures and all the fellow players that Copeland was hanging out with and taking pictures with, going to the basketball game with this past weekend, and coming out of the visit, everybody thinks it looks pretty good for the 4-star wide receiver. would be a big time get. This is a wide receiver, playmaker type of wide receiver. I think Dan Mullen can really do something with. And I really also, it's one of those, we keep talking about sending messages and being back to big boy recruiting. Like, look, Alabama's squarely in this one too. And it would send somewhat of a signal that, a guy in the state of Florida, look, how many times have we seen these big time state of Florida athletes go to Alabama and start making plays, and especially at wide receiver? This is another one where it doesn't need to happen, and Copeland needs to be a Gator.
Absolutely. That's the kind of guys we've been talking about, all year that Florida has to get. You've got this. I mean, you're not going to close down the state. You're never going to keep every school from coming and getting a big target or two. You're not going to take them all. But you've got to win some of those battles. You got to toe the line against the biggest schools and the biggest competition and the best coaches out there, and not be afraid of Nick Saban. I think that's one of the very first things I said on this show when I came on board last year, and toe the line and win these battles. Well, here we are. He's done it at quarterback with Emory Jones. Now he has a chance to get him a wide receiver, a featured weapon to go with his young quarterback. It's coming down to the line, but it looks like he may just pull this one off.
Yeah, we've talked pretty extensively about the baseline of this class, and just the 13 guys they've already signed really make this a pretty strong class anyway. And so a lot of the guys he's going to add, I mean, obviously we all want to be greedy, and we all want the best, and we all want the big guys who are out there. But at the end of the day, this is a pretty solid class, regardless of what happens on Wednesday.
It is. And, one thing we were mentioning, though, at this wide receiver position, you talk about Jacob Copeland. We're talking before the show. It's been 10 years, class of 2008, since Florida has signed 4 blue-chip wide receivers, 4 4-stars. Now, Florida won't do that in the sense of signing freshman recruits this year. But at the same time, when adding Trevon Grimes and adding Van Jefferson as transfers, I mean, that's essentially the same thing as adding a junior college player who does count towards the rankings. And with Justin Watkins and Jacob Copeland, you'd be signing the 89th best and the 69th best players in the nation, 2 top 100 receivers in Watkins and Copeland, and then 2 former players in Trevon Grimes and Jefferson, who were ranked number 41 and number 106 nationally at the position. So you've almost got 4 top 100 players coming in at wide receiver in one group. And then when you add Emory Jones to that, who's a blue chip quarterback, they haven't brought in to the University of Florida a group of 4 blue chip wide receivers and a blue chip quarterback since 2006, since Tebow and Harvin were here. And while I'm not for one second throwing Emory Jones and any of those wide receivers in the realm of being a Harvin or a Tebow, it's still a major milestone. And I love that Dan Mullen's doing it after doing it in 2006.
And I think you can't, maybe you shouldn't throw Harvin as the comparison, but one guy you can throw in is Tyree Cleveland. So he had a .9810 rating from the 24/7 Sports Composite when he came in. Trevon Grimes is at .9806. Van Jefferson is .9517. And then if you look at Jacob Copeland, he's .9651. And then where is he? Justin Watkins is .9567. So really, you're looking at guys who are pretty close to the ability of Tyree Cleveland based on the 24/7 rankings, and you got 4 of those guys out on the field plus Tyree Cleveland. And that's a pretty decent set of guys.
Yeah, and I was going to go there too. I was looking at Tyree Cleveland was the guy that brought to my mind too. He was the 34th ranked national player. So there you go. You're looking at top 100 receivers.
Well, they also do very different things, right? So Justin Watkins is somebody who's gotten the ball a lot out of the backfield, and you look at Jacob Copeland's tape, and it's a lot more stuff outside. Certainly, Tyree Cleveland is a lot more outside, and then then you get a little bit of both when you look at Jefferson and Grimes. So I think you're gonna. We've talked a little bit about how on defense, the idea of having Trey Dean and Amari Burney, you have some flexibility on the backside, having a point guard versus having a power forward on defense. Well, you could think about doing that on offense as well with these wide receivers.
Yeah, I'm going to save my commentary on that and be optimistic, but I'm going to have a lot to say on Wednesday if they pull this off, because you're talking about a dramatic turnaround at the wide receivers position in 1 year.
And it was a position we've talked about kind of being one of the better positions on the field, Freddie Swain and Josh Hammond and those guys. But, with disappointing seasons last year, it would be interesting to see if Grimes and Jefferson are eligible to play in 2018, how those guys fit into the fold now. But you've already talked about another complete transformation in that position that really liked under Will Muschamp, got better under Jim McElwain, but we really didn't get to see it because the offense and the quarterback position still just couldn't get it done. Now you're surrounding a new system for Felipe Franks and a young quarterback, Emory Jones, you're surrounding him with a pretty good bit of talent where we already think the running back is pretty well set as well and getting better in this class as well with Clement and Pierce. You're already looking at a talent infusion in just a short time under Dan Mullen. Hey, look, we know we got to get the offensive line straightened out, but I would say the playmakers, if you get Copeland in along with the names we've already said, and you get these top 100 receivers, these blue chip receivers, I think you're starting to see the transformation go as far as playmakers go.
Yeah, the other thing is I mean, this is right up my alley because if you bring in all these wide receivers, and unfortunately I don't have my sign tonight. My wife cleaned the basement. I don't have my sign, but it means you can move in Kadarius Toney from wide receiver because you've got all these blue chip guys on the outside. So again, flexibility, right? And you've got Daquan Green from last year's class who was ranked in pretty much the same stead, 0.95, somewhere in that range in the 24/7 composite. So it's a big deal to be able to bring in that talent, but really I think Copeland's sort of the icing on the cake. There are other guys I'm looking at who are really sort of the meat and potatoes of the guys that I think they want to add. And those are sort of the guys on the defensive side of the ball to me.
Bill, you kind of helped us out here with the rundown of the show here. Where you want to go with talking about the remaining targets? We already hit Jacob Copeland just because he was the more recent visit, and Florida had an okay visit weekend, but Copeland's the guy that's really going to come out of the limited. I think 3 guys were on campus, and probably going to be the only one out of this last visit weekend. There was plenty of attention since there were not many visitors on campus anyway. And like I said, we saw him at the basketball game with Emory Jones. It really seemed like the coaches could really hone in on Jacob Copeland this past weekend. But hey, look, we've seen past couple visit weekends, plenty of guys on campus and plenty of big names that the Gators are in for.
Yeah, and they had set up the last weekend to be like their big final push premier weekend, and it didn't really materialize. And, we mentioned that a few weeks back, and I told you that the risk of that is that sometimes those guys get convinced before they show up on your campus to look elsewhere. And you saw that with Coinus Miller. Auburn locked down their defensive tackle there, and he didn't come in. William Barnes and Ed Montelis decided not to visit. And I think, that was a situation where I'm just not convinced Mullen had a whole lot of a chance to turn those guys. Now, I don't want to make excuses. It's a results-oriented business, but they decided not to visit. They decided they were done and they didn't need to shop around anymore. It sounds like they're set to North Carolina. But at the same time, Mullen has focused on his guys. And like I said, we're still looking at probably close to 12 guys for a limited amount of spots. So if you want, we can kind of go down the list here just on a quick rundown of who's left on the board and how that's shaping up. We can talk about the crystal ball trends.
Yeah, I mean, of course, a lot of people are wondering who we think will be in the class. So I think we could probably run down the names and see, and our feelings on who we think will Florida will end up with on Wednesday.
All right. Well, here's the list I've got, and this is like everybody I'm hearing mentioned, and there could be more because Mullen could be working something back channels. That happens all the time, and we don't know if they have any surprise defections and miss out on guys where it necessitates them going down the board, or if they'd be willing to. They might want to save the spots. Regardless, here's who's left. We've talked about Justin Watkins. He's committed to Florida. Richard Garage, the offensive lineman, and Griffin McDowell. So they got a wide receiver, 2 offensive linemen committed. Then you got Jacob Copeland, the wide receiver. We talked about him. The only other offensive skill position player you really hear mentioned is tight end Glenn Beal. He's an out-of-state guy. It doesn't sound like he's coming. He didn't visit. He was supposed to. I don't think he's in. Now, the 2 heavy hitters now, we might want to stop and pause and talk about this a little bit, are the linemen on either side. Number 1 offensive lineman in the nation, Nicholas Petit-Frere, and defensive tackle, Nesta Silvera. Those seem to be the Nicholas Petit-Frere recruitment is wide open at this point. Nobody seems to know where he's leaning. It seemed to be trending a little bit away from Florida in the buzz today. But I don't think anybody's really that confident about where he's headed. The Nesta Silvera, now I'm sure you guys are going to have some input on this one. We continue to hear indications that he might be seriously giving Florida a look, but we also hear indications that it's just buzz and that he's out recruiting for Miami and other things. So it's kind of hard to say what's going on there. I'm not super confident on either one of these guys at this point.
Yeah, we've heard the talk of Silvera about a week or so ago, guys. More, I guess a little bit more than a week or so, I guess. And it was kind of funny. We've all kind of just came about in the private message we have is, hey, I heard this about Severa. Oh, really? I did too. And our sources were different for a lot of the talk. So I think there is a lot of legit talk out there about Severa flipping from Miami to Florida. I still find it difficult. These American heritage kids, most of them are, you kind of see where they're leaning already coming into Wednesday. But do they want to follow one another? Florida's in really good shape for Chatfield, and will Severa want to follow him to Gainesville? How much did he enjoy his visit? What did he tell the coaches? I think there's a lot of play in here. To me, it doesn't matter if he told the coaches one thing. I don't know if he did or not. I'm just saying, it doesn't matter if he told the coaches one way or another. Everything can change on Wednesday, and we've seen it happen. We've seen coaches who thought they would have a guy in the fold, and he doesn't come and goes somewhere else. So National Signing Day is full of surprises, but when it's all said and done, I kind of agree with Bill. I think Silvera stays at Miami, but there's a lot of buzz out there that's saying he's coming to Gainesville.
Yeah, and the buzz, I think, really picked up right around his official visit. So you do wonder what the legitimacy is with that there. At the end of the day, though, it'd be a huge get for Florida, both because their defensive line needs the numbers for this year, but also because he just jumps off the tape. I mean, he's one of those guys who looks like he's playing against middle schoolers when he's out there on the film when you're looking at it. And those are the types of elite talent that Mullen doesn't really have in this class thus far. He's got a lot of guys he's got a few guys who are ranked top 100. So you look at Emory Jones, he's 85th. You look at Garage, he's 87th. Justin Watkins is 89th. The guys and Trevon Grimes was 41st when he came out, but Silvera's 54th, and he's a real strong player. So, that's where I think it makes a difference to have somebody like him come in, is he's really bordering on that elite talent, not sort of the lower tier of the top 100, which are still very good players, but they're not like the can't miss guys.
Yeah, I think he'd be a great pickup for Florida in so many ways, to deprive Miami of the talent, when they really need him to, for Mullen to overcome a late visit to the hometown school and still reel him in that situation. It would just be tremendous. I think that there are people talking, and I think that maybe there are indications coming from Silvera that he's very interested in maybe more than that to Florida. I'm just having a hard time seeing it happen at this point. I'm going to have to see it to believe it. And I'm going to play the negative Nelly. We'll see.
Other names, we'll see what kind of happens. Look, I think we probably need to put back in there. Watkins, we all feel good about. McDowell, all feel good about. The one commitment, I think, that's kind of in question, of course, is Richard Garage, offensive lineman. A lot of Auburn talk, a lot of Clemson talk. I think he sticks with Florida in the end. But, guys, I think, when I've run down the list and trying to see these other schools that Florida's in competition for, it might be a little surprising. It looks like Auburn is a school where Florida is fighting for a lot of prospects coming up for Wednesday. You got Richard Garage. You have Caleb Johnson. You got Caleb Tanner. Florida's in the battle with Auburn for all three of those guys. And, I think Auburn's really in serious in the running. Caleb Tanner as well. Look out for Nebraska there. But it does seem you hear Auburn's name when you hear Georgia's name, when you hear FSU's name, when you hear Miami's name, when it comes to who they're looking for at signing on Wednesday. So Garage, I think he sticks for Florida in the end. But Caleb Johnson, Caleb Tanner, I really am interested to see where those guys go.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how this defensive line class shakes out for Florida and for Auburn, because, like you said, they're both in a numbers crunch. They both need defensive linemen. They're both after the same amount of guys, and it's going to be interesting to see which school some of these kids prefer. I mean, there is some buzz that Caleb Johnson might prefer Auburn, but might not have the chance. And I think it might be reversed with Caleb Tanner, so we'll kind of have to see how it goes. But one thing I have heard is that Florida could take 5 to 6 defenders if they have the opportunity to take guys they like here at the home stretch.
And it's a good thing they're competing with Auburn. So, Auburn over the last 4 years has averaged nationally 9th from a recruiting perspective, 4th in the conference, and had 15 blue chips, which is 3rd in the SEC. So that's the kind of program you want to be going up against. I mean, I know we talked about this last week, that really going up against the big boys are the types of things we're looking for. And we also said last week that, that Florida's going to lose some of these battles, and that's okay. but you need to be involved in the battles. And at the same time, Florida also can't take everybody on their board. I mean, they got 5 potentials at defensive end that we're going to talk about, and they aren't taking 5 defensive ends. So there's a little bit of a game of musical chairs going on, both with the commits and whether they want to come to Florida, and whether Florida's their first choice, and whether they're going to have to come to Florida because their first choice isn't available. So, like Bill says, it's going to be really interesting to see on Wednesday.
Yep. And going back to this past weekend, Dorian Gerald visited as well, JUCO guy, defensive end, said, he'd like to see himself a defensive end in a 3-4, but there's some rumors that he'd like to see himself in a 4-3 as well. So he might just be kind of appeasing whoever he's talking to and writing an article or whatever. But he seemed to enjoy his visit to Gainesville this past week. And there's been a lot of talk about jersey color when guys are taking pictures that made the rounds on Twitter this past weekend. So look out for the white jerseys, and we'll see if that holds true or not. But
conspiracy theory,
it's out there. It's Will and I heard it a couple weeks ago, and we kind of shared it, but it came out on Twitter this past weekend. So okay, I won't keep that down too much longer. we'll kind of see what happens with the white helmets, white jerseys. Of course, Copeland I think was all white and the orange helmet. So I don't know if the helmet has anything to do with it. But anyway, yeah, Dorian Gerald. A lot of people thought he might play inside as well, but probably Texas A&M is in the picture. Well, Jimbo Fisher out there. We'll kind of see. Look like to be a Florida link. He visited Texas A&M last weekend, visited Florida this past weekend. Was the other kind of big time get that besides Jacob Copeland that the coaching staff was after.
You say Dorian Gerald?
Yeah.
Listen, that's a guy that he's really gotten a lot of attention from big time programs down the stretch here as a junior college prospect. And if you follow him on Twitter, you really see the gratitude in that kid for the opportunities he's got right now. And he's obviously had to struggle to get where he's at. And I like the fact that Jimbo Fisher's after him. I mean, Jimbo Fisher's one heck of a recruiter with one heck of a track record in recruiting. But I think it looks good for Florida right now, just from everything he's posting. I mean, just don't see a whole lot of Aggie stuff coming out of that feed. And I think that he's a guy that will play some 3-4 end. I don't think he's a nose. I think he can be a 270-pound guy if they choose to bulk him up. I mean, even though he's got short time at Florida, being a junior college prospect with maybe 2 years left to play. But he's got an explosive pass rush, and a guy that even at 3-4 can affect the passing game and probably the running game with the way he can, especially in that one gap scheme that if that's what they choose to go with, to be just a real disruptive force in the backfield.
The name I think that could be, hopefully, I mentioned it just a second ago when we're talking about Silvera, and can Andrew Chatfield help bring him in down there, American Heritage? 4-star, a ton of crystal balls are kind of floating out there towards Florida for his services. I think going down there in South Florida, getting a kid as well with this new staff, being able to see this new staff go down there and get one of those guys, a defensive end, outside linebacker, of course. Another, we're talking about how Florida needs what's on the board left. A lot of defenders are on the board, and he seems to be the big one out there that Florida could pull in.
Yeah, I mean, I think you look at Chatfield or you look at Caleb Tanner. Either of those guys really sort of Tanner, especially. I think I mentioned that he reminds me of Alex McAllister. Chatfield's a little bit more somebody who's going to hold the edge. Potentially would be. Looks like he might be a little bit better in coverage, but again, it's a relatively limited film study on those guys. But I mean, Chatfield's a big get, especially again taking him away from Miami, and also filling a real area of need. I mean, anybody who watched Florida play last year watched the linebackers struggle covering running backs in coverage, struggling with gap integrity, those sorts of things, and an infusion of talent like Chatfield would be a big deal.
Yeah, just to clarify, Andrew Chatfield is a 4-star. Outside linebacker, maybe pass rusher in a 3-4, and a guy that is a teammate of Nesta Silvera. This guy's from South Florida. He was once committed to Ohio State, I believe, or at least heavily recruited by them. So
he was committed to him.
Yeah, so to go down to American Heritage High School down there, the teammate, some of these other big blue chip prospects, and to pull him out and take him away from Miami, at the 11th hour, it's a coup for Mullen. It really is. He's a guy that can impact the defense, and he's a guy that establishes a little bit of a presence in South Florida for Mullen's effort, and not just for an also-ran recruit. This guy's a big-time recruit. There is some chatter that Randy Russell, who we keep talking about, a guy that signed with Florida, then found out he wasn't going to be able to play for a medical issue. He's been talking to Chatfield. He's been talking to Silvera. So some of the optimism about that package deal showing up in Florida and getting both those guys is linked to the fact that Russell gained traction in talking to Chatfield, and now Chatfield might be talking to Silvera. I'm happy with just Chatfield. He's a great addition to the class. He's going to be a key member of the class. But I'm also hoping that he can influence his friend and teammate Inessa Silvera and get him to come along for the ride. So we're about to find out.
And lo and behold, it can't be easy on signing day. And that's what we're finding out in the school that could be throwing a wrench into, if you believe some of the reports out there. On signing day would be Notre Dame. Some talk of Noah Boykin really considering them now, when he, a week or so ago, looked like a lock to Florida. Notre Dame's coming in and making him second guess. And of course, 5-star offensive tackle Nicholas Petit-Frere. If you talk to a lot of people now, it seems he's leaning more the Notre Dame route. I still think Ohio State may be in it a little bit. Greg Schiano looks like he may be taking the job with the Patriots, so we'll see if that comes into play there. A lot of people still think that the proximity to home could play in Florida's favor, and getting a degree from Florida could help Nicholas Petit-Frere make his decision for the Gators. But Notre Dame coming in, guys, late for a 4-star and a 5-star that Florida could really use.
Yeah, and I really don't want to see them end up with either one of these guys. Nicholas Petit-Frere, we've talked at length about him, number one offensive lineman in the country. He's a guy that, Florida needs at a position of need, a guy that can impact the roster and just juice the recruiting effort. They haven't had a 5-star since 2015, and that's something that needs to change. And with respect to some of these outstanding football players that are in this class, Florida's best prospect should not be down in the bottom half of the top 100. They should be able to land top 25 national recruits with regularity. You're not going to have a dozen of them in the class, but you should be able to nail some of them. And this is one of those that they should be able to land. That said, the Notre Dame influence here, the Notre Dame poll, it reminds me of Sam Young. I think he was back in 2006. St. Thomas Aquinas High School in Fort Lauderdale. He was a 5-star tackle. Was a high school teammate of Marcus Gilbert, 4-star tackle, who did come to Florida. And Dan Winger, I think his name was a center who went to Notre Dame. And Sam Young, I believe, was Catholic, and it was a Catholic high school, and they went off to Notre Dame. Sometimes you have these kids that are just hard to keep home. So this appears like it could be one of those situations. Petit-Frere is approaching this apparently very cerebrally, trying to make a plan for his future and pick his college destination. So I totally respect whatever he chooses, of course. But I think Mullen's doing everything he can. And I think if he loses this one, it's not one that I would really give him a hard time about.
Yeah, I think as far as Boykin, you can understand a little bit. So last year, Florida signed 4 corners. 3 of them were blue chip players. So they don't have anybody signed this year, but still, you look at sort of the depth chart and who's there and who Boykin's going to be competing against. And, I can understand why he might take a second look, particularly if he's starting to feel the numbers crunch and thinks he might get left out if some of the big boys really commit to Florida. So, I think some of that might just be him looking for he's ranked 365th nationally. He's a very good player, but if you have to make a decision between Jacob Copeland and Noah Boykin, I think you're going to go with Copeland, even if you'd like to have a corner in the class. So, so that may be a little bit of it as well, and also some of the guys they signed last year.
There's one other possibility too here. I mean, maybe he needs a second school if he's going to have an announcement on TV. That does happen. And I'm not to say that he can't commit to Notre Dame. I'm sure he can, but that's one thing to understand too. By the way, I read somewhere Richard Garage is probably going to have an Auburn hat on the table and have an announcement. He's already committed to Florida. You could look at that as bad news. Why have an announcement if you're going to pick the same school? But hey, this is these kids' last chance for the spotlight, and if you're going to do that, you're going to have more than one finalist.
Absolutely. So you guys ready to put in who you think Florida signs on Wednesday?
As long as Will goes first.
Sure. So I think a realistic case for what you're going to see from Florida is likely. So there's really 4 tiers. So you got Petit-Frere, Silvera, and Copeland, who are in that top tier. Then you've got Chatfield and Malcolm Lamar, who are sort of in the top 200 players. Then you got Malik Langham, Caleb Tanner, and Noah Boykin, who are in that 300 to 400 range. And then you got Dorian Gerald, Fabian Levette, Caleb Johnson, and Glenn Beal, sort of in that 4 to 500 range, 4 to 600 range in terms of nationally ranking. I think you probably figure Florida gets one guy from each quadrant. I don't know that they're necessarily going to get Petit-Frere, Silvera, and Copeland. If they do, and that's all they get, I think it's still a fantastic class. So, I figure they probably bring in Boykin, Chatfield, and I'm going to go with Silvera. I think they bring in Silvera, and from that lower tier, which is still very good players, but then Dorian Gerald. So those are the 4 guys that I think they bring in. And with those 4 guys, they'd be sitting at a 24/7 ranking of 258.2, which would be on par with what McElwain's recruiting has looked like the past 2 years in a transition class, with Grimes and Van Jefferson adding extra value too that isn't really calculated in that. So those are the 4 I'm going to go with. I'm going to say Boykin, Chatfield, Silvera, and Gerald.
And you're already counting the guys that are committed, right?
Watson. I'm already counting Garage and those guys. Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
So you think they take 7 total and leave 2 spots open?
I'm not sure. So I've looked back at transition classes in the past, and it's always been between 17 and 21. And so it's not something that Florida historically has loaded up on. And I do think that Mullen is making relationships. He spent a lot of time putting out offers for 2019 over the last 2 or 3 weeks. And if he thinks he can get better players in 2019 and then back count them to 2018, I think that's the wise move to make. The transcendent players, I just wrote an article about this, but the transcendent players come in the second class. Percy Harvin, Tim Tebow, Chris Leak, those guys have come in the second class traditionally for these coaches. And I think that's what we're really looking for next year, is seeing that bump from what you said, sort of the lower tier top 100 guys, to bringing in guys who are ranked 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and 4 or 5 of them all at once. And that'll really be the true test of Mullen's tenure.
Yeah, not that we want to stop talking about first-year classes here, but Will, you bring up an excellent point. I mean, the second classes are always better. I mean, in 2002 for Zook, his first class was ranked 10th nationally. His second class was ranked 1st. Urban Meyer's first class was ranked 12th. His second class was ranked 2nd. Will Muschamp's first class was ranked 11th. The second class was ranked 4th in the country. And even Jim McElwain's first class, who struggled, was ranked 21st, but his second class jumped all the way to 12th. So, guys, understand that these scores we're throwing out here, what we think, and wherever it does actually end up, that should be viewed as a springboard going into next year. So if you finish 10th, 11th, 12th, you can almost bet that they're going to be top 10 in year 2 in recruiting.
Bill, you want to throw yours in?
Yeah, I kind of went the same route he did. I left one spot open because I just wanted to prepare our listeners for that possibility. And I think actually 22 is the top transition total I saw. That was 2002 with Zooks, unless I've got some bad math there. But
no, you're right.
Let's see. I had them keeping Justin Watkins, Richard Garage, and Griffin McDowell, the 3 commits they've got currently. And then I had them adding Dorian Gerald, the defensive end, JUCO. I also had them adding Andrew Chatfield, who would be the 4-star outside linebacker, Caleb Tanner, another 4-star outside linebacker, and Noah Boykin, the 4-star cornerback from the Northeast or the Atlantic states. And then I went with Caleb Johnson, but I'm not feeling good about that. But that's my 8. The 3 commits plus 5, and I had that as a total score of 253.25. That's 253.25, and that would have fallen between 10 and 15 over the past 5 years.
So no Copeland for you.
No. Oh, did I not say Copeland?
No.
I didn't have him either.
He was on my list, but that he should be in my score there. But
okay.
I think they'll grab Copeland too.
Okay.
I'm sorry, that was just an omission. But I did not have him landing Silvera, and I did not have him landing Petit-Frere because I want you guys to give me a hard time when it happens.
That would pretty much be the only difference between mine and yours. Then I got Chatfield, I got Gerald. I'm throwing in Boykin, Copeland, Tanner, And I'll be like I've always said, when everything is I think about 50-50, I let my bias take over. That's why I'm throwing in Petit-Frere. Not that I'm confident about it. I think it's 50-50. But like I said, when I go 50-50, I let my bias take over. So I say Florida gets Petit-Frere and lands a huge signing day surprise there. But yeah, I think we're all pretty much on the same page of who they can get in. I guess just the amount of number. I think that's kind of where we differ, and I do kind of feel weird making it that they take a full 25. I went ahead and filled the 9 spots with Watkins, Garage, and McDowell as well. So I do think Malcolm Lamar sticks with FSU in the end. I don't see a Silvera flip either. But hopefully that talk, and look, if that happens, then you'll start seeing some shuffling along the Florida border. Kind of plays out the way I think it will. You'll start seeing what they do with Caleb Tanner and the other guys there. So
I'm ready. I just want to say I'm ready to embrace the power of the homer. I'm ready, but you don't know what I've been through the last 3 years, dude.
It's been traumatic for Bill. I mean, this is like his wheelhouse, and he's had to pretend to be positive.
Prospect and come on this show and say a Florida coach is going to get him. They're going to have to show me. It's been a long, hard road, but I'm ready. I
only know what you felt for the last year. So,
so if he brings in Silvera, Petit-Frere, and Copeland, which of the Philadelphia celebrations are you going to embrace when that happens there, Bill?
Well, I'm not going to climb any light poles, and you're
not flipping my truck.
No, not eating horse poop. But I'm going to tell you this right now, and I want our listeners to understand this. If for some reason Dan Mullen ends up landing Copeland and Silvera and Petit-Frere and holds on to the ones they got and these other guys, I'm going to freak out. And I'm going to do it on the show.
So saying that, we definitely will have a show Wednesday night, of course. We're not going out without a show on signing day. As Bill laid out for us today, we'll have, of course, full statistical analysis, everything you expect to get from Gators Breakdown you're going to get on National Signing Day. That night, we'll have our normal Wednesday night show about 8:30 on Wednesday night. Of course, they'll be making sure Bill and Will comparisons to past Florida transition classes with Urban Meyer, Ron Zook, Will Muschamp, Jim McElwain. How's it compared to those guys? Of course, we'll be looking at the players, what they can bring to the Gators, what they would mean on the field. Can any of them make an impact early? I think that will be a point of contention that we can talk about there, and kind of grades. And it all probably unless how Bill just spilled it out, it probably all won't be positive. So we'll look at some positives and negatives, looking at some probably depth issues Florida will still have in a couple of positions, no matter which way it plays out this coming National Signing Day. So, guys, it's going to be a fun 48 hours for us, and we'll be definitely interacting with people the next couple of days, and especially on Wednesday.
Yeah, absolutely, we will. And I wanted to throw this out there. GatorBait.net, the 24/7 Sports Florida affiliate, has an announcement schedule up. So I'm totally saying this on there. I hope they're not mad at me for this, but Caleb Tanner is going to be announced at 8:45. Justin Watkins 9:15. It kicks off throughout the day, and I won't list all of these, but Nesta Silvera at 10 o'clock, Chatfield at the same time, Jacob Copeland at 2 o'clock. So there's going to be announcements throughout the day. Encourage you to go check that out at their website at GatorBait.net. But I will be tweeting throughout the day, probably do a little periscoping, and we'll kind of crescendo with our big show Wednesday night. But you guys can count on us to keep you updated as best we can.
Yeah, and the last one I think I saw on that list would be Richard Garage, anywhere from 2:30 to 2:45. So Florida will have to wait pretty late in the day to get the class all wrapped up.
Yeah, and then Mullen will walk out to the podium and say they got everybody they want. Because that's what all coaches do.
Yeah, but sometimes you can actually tell whether that's true or not. So we'll be able to tell people whether that's true.
Yeah. It's going to be a fun signing day this year, guys.
Yeah, it should be fun. Should be a lot of fun. Should be a lot of fun. Remember, you can find Bill on Twitter, Bill Sykes at Real B Sykes. That's Twitter handle there. Will Miles, you can find Will on Twitter at Will Miles SEC. I'm your host of Gators Breakdown, David Waters. You can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. National Signing Day coming up in a couple of days. Guys and girls out there, thanks for listening. to Gators Breakdown.